Good morning and welcome to Downtown Download. This is Downtown Partnership's COVID Resource and Recovery webinar featuring the one and only Councilman Costello and I. And so I thank you for joining us again. We have a power-packed show today. As you can tell, I know our attendance was great for this show. And so thank you for tuning in. We want to keep the intro piece very short because we want to make sure that we leave as much time as possible for our guests today. And when I tell you we have some good ones, we have some really great guests. We have, as I mentioned, Councilman Costello, who's always there. We also have Jay Coldren, and Jay is going to bring us a very great national perspective on the hospitality industry. He's knowledgeable about restaurants and hotels, and so we look forward to talking about sort of the guidelines and opening for recovery. We also have with us today two of our hometown heroes. We have Ms. Onahlea Shimunek, who I'm actually looking across from my office. I can look out and touch you at the GM of the Lord Baltimore Hotel. And so thank you for joining us, Onahlea. And we'll get to you guys later. I just want to make sure they know who's in store. And what we're excited about with what you've done with the Lord Baltimore, we know that you've remained open during this time. And so we look forward to hearing some of that. And we'll also hear from Juan Webster, the GM of the Sagamore Pendry Hotel, who didn't remain open at that point, but also has a restaurant in his hotel. And so we should get a lot of perspectives today. And so I thank you for joining us. Just to give everybody a sort of overview of what will happen today, I just want to talk about a brief thing that Downtown Partnership did this past weekend that I think falls in line with what's happening internationally. The councilman is going to give us an update on the mayor's small business COVID-19 task force, especially some sort of nuggets on the restaurant subcommittee. And then the councilman will take the panelists through a series of questions that we've either received in advance or, that we know are just hot on the minds of a lot of the attendees. Following the sort of formal question set, we'll open it up to you, the attendees, to have your questions answered. And so I ask that you ahead of time, as soon as you have a question, if you wouldn't mind writing that in the Q&A box at the bottom. Once we get to the question segment, I'll come back on and we'll pose those questions to the panelists. So please continue to write your questions. We'll get to them at the end. I just want to give a brief, and I'm going to say highlight, but I want to start off with just the seriousness of what's happening internationally overall. The social justice movement is impacting everyone. And so I first want to say just thank you, right? Thank you for standing up. Thank you for having a voice. Thank you. And even in Baltimore, we had a number of peaceful protests that used our downtown area as a platform to share those stories and just the oneness. Our business community surrounded that with welcome messages of love. And as they started, some, had a need for different things to board. You never know what's going to happen in the midst of all of these things. But I applaud our Downtown Partnership team for making sure and partnering with those businesses and residents to cover those boards with messages of love. And so all throughout Baltimore, we did that. I am going to, a quick aside, that was just an amazing sort of show of how this is not just a Black thing, a white thing, a green thing. It is now become about all of us in the support. We had one property owner who said, you know what, I believe in the love and all of that stuff, but I want to make sure in my building it says Black Lives Matter. And so you just talk about the oneness of our city, the oneness of what's happening across the country, and I thank you for that. So I want to transition, Councilman, to you. I know that a lot of the work that we're doing on the task force is supporting all of these efforts. We want to make sure that none of this goes unnoticed. In the restaurant community, we have a number of African-American and other businesses that we're supporting along the way. So can you give us just a brief update on what's happening on that front?
Sure thing. Thanks, Shalonda. So I put two links in the chat window. We have the Small Business Task Force, and underneath that, we have the Restaurant Subcommittee. Our next meeting for the Small Business Task Force will be this Thursday at 11 a.m. And the next meeting in the Restaurant Subcommittee will be Friday at 9 a.m. A lot of what the Restaurant Subcommittee is working on I know Juan is actually a member of both of these groups, is coming up with guidelines for restaurants, essentially best practices to look at as they're reopening. So we've had a lot of good meetings so far. I think we're making a lot of progress. Looking forward to our next meetings, and hope that folks will feel free to join in and certainly provide feedback. I want to provide a couple other links. I will very quickly touch on these. First is the phase 1 reopening for Baltimore City. That'll give an explanation of what's been opened and where Baltimore City's at. Of course, the outdoor seating relief program and the outdoor dining street closure program. Both of those are opportunities for restaurants to essentially be able to expand their outdoor seating in an expedited manner. There's a press release on the outdoor seating, which will give more information on that. Distancing, which is also kind of the third leg of that stool, which is an initiative being run out of BDC. And then a summary of the city's small business recovery efforts at Baltimore Together. So that's all I've got. Back to you, Shalonda, and we can get to our guests.
Which is perfect. So thank you. So now we get to the portion of the panel where we'd really like to make sure we're hearing from the guests. This is a particular emphasis on the hotel community today, the impacts of the hotel community, and really guidelines. While we recognize, it's not probably the happiest message that we want to hear in this time, what we recognize as well is that having the guidelines, us figuring out how we do this together, and us continuing to support one another through the process is the way for us to all recover. And so, Councilman, I know we talked about starting off with Jay to kind of give us that perspective. Want to see if you want him to do so, just sort of give an overview. If you want to ask him the questions first.
Yeah, Jay, thanks, Shalonda. Jay, can you talk a little bit about the work that you're doing?
Sure. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and thank you for inviting me to the panel. When this whole pandemic started, our team is, I work for a company called Streetsense out of Baltimore, Maryland, and we're a creative consultancy, and we work very closely with the hospitality industry and with the restaurants and bars, and I lead the hospitality and restaurant and bar division for them. We saw all of our partners, all of our clients just sort of freeze and, kind of trying to deal with what does this mean and how do we, come to grips with the global pandemic. And then as that sunk in, how do we survive the next, it's not going to be 3 months. Now it's 12, 18, 24 months. How do we survive? So what our team did, and really on two fronts, is we put together as many resources as we could in one place that we found from the CDC and from operators and from people in Asia, and restaurant groups and hotel groups in Asia that were struggling with this. And we created sort of two tools. The first toolkit was a pandemic relaunch guide for restaurants and bars. And the second was a guide to think about how to reboot your hotel in a way that is more profitable and really, focuses on being cash flow positive in the beginning. So these smaller hotel operators can really survive throughout the pandemic. And our partners and the people that we, our clients, one client we had in Jackson Hole didn't even have a lock on the front door. They had to rope the front door closed because there just wasn't a lock. They'd never closed. And we thought this is going to be a huge struggle getting people from a dead stop all the way back to, up, running, making money, and then, taking care of debt service and then really functioning as a viable business. And that was our goal with these two tools, to help both the restaurant and food service community and the hotel community just get back on their feet and think about this in a way and bring all the resources together.
That's great, Jay. And I took a look at the hotel survival guide. I apologize for the very lengthy link. Our IT security within the city parsed that link out. It's a little longer than it should be, about an entire page. But anyway, there was a lot of great information in there. Just thinking about the work that you're doing, Jay, and the restaurant and hotel industry and our hospitality industry in Baltimore, what do you think is the most important thing right now that restaurants and hotels can do to survive through the pandemic?
This isn't a sexy answer, but it's probably capital management. I think specifically restaurants who've done essentially one capital raise to get up and running really very often don't have access to other capital. And a lot of the COVID-19 legislation was well-intentioned, but didn't really help a lot of these restaurants and a lot of these businesses, because it was so restrictive on how to, you know, pay back the, you know, how to use it for employees and the percentage and all that. And I know they're trying to fix it now, but really the access to capital and thinking about restarting your business very smartly and very judiciously with the available money that you have and bringing people back on as the business rebuilds is we think a recipe for surviving this in the long run. So that was what we focused on.
Got it. That makes sense. One of the things that we've seen a lot of restaurants in Baltimore do is transition to pickup order delivery, or pickup and order delivery. What have you seen in terms of how that can have a positive impact on a restaurant, what they're able to do with their revenue?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen that, you know, people feel much more comfortable picking things up. We see, you know, even before the pandemic, there was a very significant rise in takeout orders and delivery and things like that. That was happening. And so I think that this situation has forced restaurants to get good at that component, but it's hard. And if you weren't doing it before, it's hard to just reboot that and start it immediately. I think that it's never going to cover a busy Saturday night restaurant. We're seeing about, for restaurant groups, about 20 to 25% can come back through these kind of extra things. Plus you're now at 25 or 30 or 50% occupancy in some jurisdictions. You're getting back to some semblance of viable revenue. But, you know, we're advising our partners, whether you want to be a grocery store or pickup or delivery or what have you, you know, diversify the business and really kind of do whatever you can in your facility to make money. So it's helpful, but it's not a silver bullet.
Yeah. So a number of states and cities across the country are, you know, ahead of where Maryland and Baltimore are in terms of reopening. What are you seeing in other cities, specifically with respect to hotels and restaurants, and how they're rebounding from this?
You know, it's surprising how quickly some are getting to about half. We have clients in Charleston and in Houston, and those are some of the earliest markets, and we also have clients in Florida. These restaurants are bouncing back relatively quickly. I think that that's a great thing for right now, but I think if you're seeing, like we saw in the news this morning, a real spike in the cases of COVID-19 as a result of this reopening, there may be future, you know, social distancing, you know, measures that are put back into place, and that's going to really hurt the restaurants. But we're seeing those communities can get back, you know, with some outdoor seating and working with the municipalities to about 50%, 60% of their pre-COVID levels of business. Some of them relatively quickly. Some smaller, you know, venues are struggling more because they just don't have the real estate to deal with it. But, you know, larger venues are doing okay.
Have there been creative things that local municipalities and states have done that you've seen in other areas in the country to help speed things along for restaurants and hotels?
You know, I think there's really two things that the municipalities are really working on that's helpful, we think. If you're going to have social distancing, restaurants need more real estate. So these programs like DC has one, I think that Baltimore is working on something as well, to open the streets and to allow restaurants to spill out into the streets, to do sort of communal dining areas, to have more space so that they can generate more revenue with social distancing. The relaxation of things like liquor delivery is super helpful. And then the other thing is it doesn't really help to give restaurants more space if it takes a month to get approval to use it. So the municipalities that have been really supportive of these initiatives have also put people in place to help speed along from the Liquor Control Board or the municipality itself, to speed along the approval to use these spaces, so that the second that these are available, within a couple of days, these restaurants are up and running. So I think it's a 1-2 punch, but just more real estate using parks and parklets and open streets and things like that, you know, just between now and maybe even late into the fall is going to be super helpful for restaurants right now.
Great. So thinking through, you know, a lot of the discussions, and Shalonda, I know you can speak to this with the task force, we've gone back and forth on whether or not customers are going to feel comfortable going out and eating out in public in a post-COVID-19 world. And we've had a lot of good, healthy discussion around that and trying to project what things are going to look like. What are you seeing across the country, especially in those places that have opened up earlier than Baltimore and Maryland? Are people comfortable going out? Are they comfortable traveling and staying at a hotel? What are you seeing?
No, I don't think that comfort is the word, but I think that there's a real pent up desire to get back into the world, to get back into restaurants, to feel some semblance of normalcy. So we're seeing two things. One, it's very real that the post-COVID consumer sees restaurants and hotels like a minefield. They're scared of touching handles, and we've seen data on this. National Restaurant Association has great data analytics on this. They're scared of it, but they want to do it. And so I think the businesses that are going to be most successful, the ones that sort of play this sanitation theater game where they really overdo it on what they're doing, and they're over communicating, and they're posting everything, and they're spending a lot of time and effort to make people feel comfortable. I mean, when you think in a hotel, the bathrobe on the back of the door that someone could sneeze on, that's not okay anymore. And extra towels may be something that you wrap up and put in the closet. So there's all of these little considerations, and stationary, is it safe and sanitary? All of these little tiny considerations are making people worried. And I think that they're looking for the businesses to reassure them, kind of like over communicating about, sanitation and safety.
Councilman and Jay, one of the things that I think supports what you're talking about, we had done, and it was very brief at Downtown Partnership, we had done a very short Instagram survey. It was 12 questions, and it was really a consumer sentiment survey to said, if we flip the switch, or when we're back to open, are people willing to go out? And the results were exactly what you said. Even in there, people, one, we got to figure out how we're going to get people to put on like real pants and actually come outside, because they've been in their pajamas forever. But outside of that, it was also, the thought of, I need to see people having a mask on. I need to make sure all of these things are done. So there's a fear of coming back, but when they come back, they want to see all of those things that help make them feel safe.
And Shalonda, I think that the other thing that we're seeing, and we're seeing this, we're in contact with a restaurant group in Asia. And I think that the businesses that don't put up with their guests and their consumers not playing ball, and actually turn people away if they're not actually keeping the most vulnerable among us safe, I think those people are going to do very well. And I think the people who kind of bend the rules and allow people to do whatever they want, they're not going to have as much of an audience, because I think people are still scared, and they will be for quite some time. So we're seeing, restaurants in different municipalities just turn people away and say, no, you got to come in here with a mask, and when you're at your table, you're fine. But as you move around, please, think of everyone. And I think those businesses are, I think there's a little bit of a spine you got to have when dealing with this right now. That'll help everybody.
I think that's a great transition to Juan Webster. Juan's the GM of the Pendry. Juan, you've been involved in the Small Business Task Force and the Restaurant Subcommittee, and we certainly appreciate the insight that you've brought. One of the things that we've heard you talk about is treating this reopening essentially as kind of a grand reopen, or grand opening, if you will, having to retrain your staff all over again. I'm just curious to hear more about that. I think our listeners would be interested in that, but also curious how what Jay was just talking about plays into that, especially in terms of, training hospitality staff, to things related to COVID-19, whether it's making sure, there's hand sanitizer stations in the right locations, wiping things down constantly. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Councilman Costello. And I appreciate the feedback and insight as well, Jay. Yeah, I think what's most important for our industry now, what we're seeing, I use the term and the concept of reopening because, there was once upon a time when I used to share with anyone interested in the hospitality industry, specifically hotels, that we were similar to hospitals in the fact that we never closed. We were always open 24/7. Our doors are open. But that's until we met COVID-19, and that kind of shifted. So we've been closed since March the 17th. And I think when you close any business for a period of 3 months or longer, you have to revisit what that looks like. Although our core values will remain in place, I think reintroducing our associates to our guests is we do one of the main focuses is making sure that they can see our smiles and our warmth through the mask and the gloves, because that alone is already a different approach, right? But I think that a huge focus is on the safety, the security, the sanitation, and that's something that we've taken so serious. We've looked at all the feedback. There's so much coming out from CDC, from local government, local guidelines about what things we should be doing post-COVID and during the COVID to make everyone feel comfortable. I think what we've committed to is essentially a peace of mind. And we've actually created almost a campaign behind that. And what it is just really a health and safety program that we've taken with our existing guidelines and enhanced it. And what it feels like is, everyone's paying attention a lot more now. Although we feel that the customer is going to be probably more empathetic and more forgiving. At the same time, Jay hinted to it, they're looking at any and everything that they can equate in their mind to some form of sanitation. Has this been clean? Was there cross-contamination? How many hands have touched this? Are there more cleaning or stricter guidelines in place for the associates? Are associates healthy coming to work? So we're thinking different, but what that starts with, although we want to build and ensure that our consumer feels confident, before we even get to that point, I think it's important that our training and our associates, they're going to be the ones to build that confidence. And I think that it's going well for the most part. There's tons of online training prior to us opening our doors in the near future. It is a requirement now that every associate is certified, per se, to make sure they understand the importance of hand washing, using gloves, face covering. And I think one part is from the associate, and as a business leader in the biggest business organization, that will be our focus. But then there's another component that we also have to have a level of accountability for the guests that are coming into our doors or dining in our restaurants, that we hold them accountable as well. We want to share and create those special moments and have people experience what the Sagamore Pendry is like. But part of that now is also making sure that the consumer and the guest plays in a way that they are protecting themselves and the people around them. So it is very different. But back to that peace of mind, it's just a matter of using all the new technologies, all the different layers, reducing capacity through, the thoughtful social distancing designs. And, I think one of the biggest things that we've been able to accomplish is our partnership.
Hey, Juan, are you still there?
In our associates and the consumer. So I would say that's where we are with it. And, we're learning every day. The fact that we haven't opened yet, it gives us an opportunity to really look out and evaluate and take the data, take the results, looking at our colleagues that are open in the industry and just learning and getting through this together with that type of commitment.
Juan, that's got to be incredibly challenging, just thinking through someone who's been trained, to work in any facet of the hospitality industry, because a lot of those face-to-face interactions, that's changed because of COVID-19. And I'm
Sure.
curious how your staff are responding to that, because, in my mind, it really does require a whole new set of training in the way you operate and handle your day-to-day duties.
Yeah, when you think about it, a lot of our industry was built on handshakes, hugs, high fives. It really is the warmth of hospitality and that greeting alone. So it's probably not as much retraining as it is an adjustment. So the adjustment piece is, I have to approach this slightly different, but yet I still want to accomplish the goal of providing outstanding food. I want to make sure that people still have magical moments. And I think you just have to be really creative. I think you're right, it is tough, but what's important is that our associates are ready to come back to work. And I think when you are built as a hospitality professional, that part will always remain in you. We're just trying to be creative and see what new approaches combined with best practices we can all take notes from and try to still deliver top-notch service. And we have to be more attentive now to listening, because we're going to learn some things from our associates. We're going out and providing that service because no one has figured it all out. But I think while we do it together, we're more likely to build stronger. And I think the last thing I'll say is waiting patiently to reopen your business. That created a huge sense of anticipation, and the team that we have, to have to sit on the sidelines temporarily, that built an incredible bond. So I think you're going to see the morale in the workplace, from our perspective, grow and really be a lot different in the future, because we all realize how important and how quickly your life could change, your outlook could change. And so we want to be mindful of all of that and commit to giving our absolute best. But you're right, that the training aspect will be forever. It will be ongoing. It will be something that we revisit, very frequently. And I think it says a lot about that the efforts that those associates are making to get back out on the front lines by way of the hospitality industry.
Sorry, my office phone is ringing and I don't know how to mute it.
Okay.
So I think that's a good transition to go over to Onahlea, and I'm just curious how your staff is responding, Onahlea. Unlike the Pendry, the Lord Baltimore is actually open. You've played a really integral role in the city's response to the pandemic. You're housing first responders. You're also serving as an isolation center, if you will, for some of our most vulnerable citizens in the city. How is your team responding to that? What has that experience been like? You're on.
For a moment, I actually sounded brilliant to myself, like with this great wisdom. The staff, talk about heroic, I think is one word to describe it. There's so many myths and mysteries around COVID, how you get it, and how you transfer it, just so understanding and getting people to get to a point where they can work in an environment where they most likely won't be exposed, but if they are, what happens? I think at the time for most of my staff that returned, it was all about the fear. And actually dealt with something this morning about picking up trash and do you have to don and doff, and I mean this whole process. So we haven't mastered it yet as far as managing the fear, and I think that that's going to be an ongoing process. One of the things I've learned that has been probably the most important, and in every business, we often talk about communication, but you really have to live the whole communication model and making sure that everybody understands what you understand. Like I would never encourage anybody to do anything unless we've talked to an IP professional. Those are the infectious prevention folks. And we've had a couple of different sit downs with that team to kind of dispel fears and myths, So we have to kind of get through that piece of it before they can start to really engage and enjoy their jobs again, because these are hospitality professionals and they want to serve, and that's what they're born and bred to do, pretty much like what Juan was saying. So to do this in a kind of a very closed environment is a little difficult. I'll tell you, the last couple of weeks, so we own Fridays now, Councilman. So you have to come by on a Friday, you and Shalonda, because now we're doing ice cream Sundays, and we had a piano player last week, so that for those people that are actually working here, the clinical staff as well as the other support staff from the city, you know, this is tiring on them as well. So to remember that first we're in the hospitality business, and to try to add some of these components that will make it feel for the people that work here, as well as the residents that are staying here, that, you know, we haven't lost our core value, which is service to folks. So, but you know, you gotta have to deal with that fear factor. The second part of that was we're bringing in professionals, mental health professionals, because it's not just about COVID. You know, you have this, the economy has gone, you know, sideways. There's a lot of other issues people are dealing with. So, you know, how do you navigate through that? You know, because, you know, when people get to work, I mean, first we're so grateful that they're here, and then we have to help them feel good about being here, that they're, you know. So we actually have our folks from our employee assistance program coming in next week to have some conversations with us. It's all volunteer, you know, that no one has to attend, but we encourage people to, especially if they're feeling the stressors of being in this environment. And we have another sit down with the infectious prevention people just to answer any questions, because as our knowledge of this virus increases, you know, protocol changes. So what do we need to do to be on the forefront of that, and keep my team safe and their families, and try to do what we do best, which is serve people.
I have to imagine it's been challenging, but again, you know, on behalf of the city, I want to say thank you. You guys have really stepped up,
Thank you.
as so many others have in the business community. You know, one of the things that I love about the Lord Baltimore is you have a really diverse array of dining options, right? You've got the lounge on the roof, you have the bar downstairs, you have the cafe on Baltimore Street. Can you talk a little bit about how each of those three options are coming along and where you see things going?
Councilman, we have three wonderful options, no doubt, and we can't wait to get the Sky Bar open. We're getting calls now. You know, when are you going to open? Love, because it's such a wonderful venue and people have a lot of fun up there, and we want to see that open. We can't wait to get the bakery open also to the outside public. So we dabbled with curbside and takeout before we became the Tri-Center. And we did pretty well with the neighborhood as far as, you know, pickup and delivery options. But now that we're a Tri-Center, we're really restricted to just in-house options. So that said, the bakery's open for everybody that's in-house, and we're doing much of what Juan was talking about, and Jay. You know, we're looking at packaging and spending a lot of time on that because in the future, room service is going to come back. It's going to look different. And for the last couple of years, a lot of the branded hotels have done like a paper, not a paper bag option, but almost like what they do in at the airport. So, you know, looking at our packaging, we have a unique opportunity to perfect room service in that way. You know, whether it's and it seems kind of crazy, but these are the things we're focused on. You know, the compostables and, you know, how that looks, you know, when it finally gets to the room, and really testing that. We have a great group that we can practice with, actually. Sky Bar is going to be a while, probably be late fall before we see that. But, you know, we talked about social distancing up there, and actually spent some time over the last couple of weeks just looking at our furniture and our cabanas and what does that look like, and how many can we actually put in those spaces. We have marked off the ballroom. Right now it's the command center, but for, you know, in the old days, we could do a meeting in the ballroom for 250. And if we follow the social distancing, it changes the calculus there. Now we can only put 80 people in the ballroom. So our business model is going to change radically as we approach. And I see Jay shaking his head. It's like, oh yeah, because if we're looking at, you know, the 6 foot rule, then for hotels like mine and so many where we rely on group business, that's going to provide a big shift for us.
Onahlea, 2 things I will never say no to are you and ice cream. So I will certainly be by, and I'll coordinate with Shalonda so we can get that on the calendar, of course.
Good. 1 o'clock. 1 o'clock on Friday.
I have a quick question for you and Juan, and then I want to turn it over to Shalonda for some questions for the panel as a whole. I'm curious what your staffing levels are looking like, you know, with everything that has happened, especially in comparison to March.
Sure. So in March, we had to minimize staff as we saw things just not produce, you know, a lot of cancellations on group and transient side, that we went into layoffs. So we laid off the lion's share of our hourly and management staff. Right now, we have a handful. We have like 12 people running the hotel right now. That's the whole food and beverage side. We had to outsource the cleaning component to experts at this, cleaning rooms that might have been COVID positive. So our in-house staff seriously is like a dozen people. So we have people in the kitchen. We have food runners. We have a couple of loss prevention folks still here, and trying to keep the engineers busy on other projects. You know, so you kind of pick and choose what we want to get accomplished before we reopen. We have a really a good opportunity to do that. But yeah, just a dozen folks here right now.
Juan, how are things looking on your end?
Very similar. I mean, we refer to it so often as like a skeleton crew. So even though we've been closed, you just can't simply shut the door and walk away. I mean, Phil's Point obviously has been very active throughout this process, but we have a very, very slim crew, and those people are making sure that the building runs efficiently, even with no guests. So I would say very similar to when as we gear up to open the doors, we are approaching reopening in a ramp-up phase. So we obviously have thought through carefully and calculated what it should look like and feel like. And I think that our goal is to make sure we do it right, and we do it in phases and stages. As the whole world reopens, we're going to take that same approach to open our doors. And, you know, once we, evaluate how and when and where and what opportunities we have, we definitely will rise to the occasion as the demand grows. So again, just being thoughtful, being wise, being mindful, still trying to run it as a business so that we are financially responsible for, you know, the business portion, including the profit, and looking at the customer experience, which is always really important. But I always go back to the most important people in any business, and that's our associates. So we're gonna play off our associates, off their energy, off their confidence, and I think that's how that will lead us to that reopening phase. But it definitely will start slower. We'll slowly bring people back, and that's one of the most exciting times for me, because we also had experience, furloughing associates and laying off associates. So to be able to make that phone call and send that note and engage with our associates about reopening plan, certainly one of the best conversations we've had in the last few months.
Yeah.
Shalonda, I'm going to thank you, Juan. Shalonda, I'm going to turn it for a couple questions for the entire.
Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Juan, Onahlea, Jay. Valuable information. The questions are starting to pour in. And so the first one, Jay, it's probably more targeted towards you, but I'd like to say a few comments on it before you answer. The question is, what is the best way that cities and business improvement districts can try to mitigate the fear of going back out? Is it certifications? Is it training? Is it information? I know for us here at Downtown Partnership, this is core to what we're focused on right now, making sure that we can help instill a sense of, as much as we can, a sense of safety and a reason to come back into downtown. A lot of the work is happening in partnership with other organizations. And so what we recognize is the value of not trying to do these things in a silo. Some of it is happening, the work is happening in the task force and the businesses who are engaged, and examples of some of those things where partnerships are working and the task force is working. One of our partner organizations, Visit Baltimore, is looking at an overall certification, an international sanitation certification that would be sort of that mark, or sort of, if you thought, good housekeeping seal of approval type thing that, you know, would say to Baltimore, to people looking to come to Baltimore, in Baltimore, our hospitality industry, our restaurants, all of these organizations have gone through this training or testing. That's one way. Other things that we're doing is really trying to centralize some guidelines so that it's not you walk into this business and one thing happens, and another business, this thing happens. And so as much as we can be a convener or catalyst for helping get that information out, we want to do that. And so we have the certification potentially, we have the guidelines, and then the other piece is key, is going to be the training element. And so I know we're really focused on that element as well. But Jay, I know across the country, you've probably been seeing some other best practices as well.
Well, you covered quite a few of them, so that's great. I think what you're talking about is really confidence in the consumer. And, you know, Baltimore, specifically downtown, you know, where all of the panelists live and work, and where a lot of the business community is such a group driven business. And so anything that you can do as a community to say, look, all of our restaurants, you know, get certified, we've updated our, you know, health department regulations, and we, you know, you'll see this symbol or this sign that says, this is how we're handling it. Everyone has been social distanced. The more you can communicate those kinds of things, I think, you know, and also there's a lot of outdoor spaces and outdoor activities in Baltimore that, you know, in and around the harbor that I think seem really appropriate to the social distancing, you know, COVID world. So I think the more you can sort of lean on those things and communicate those things, again, it's just about bringing consumer confidence back to the market. And I think it sounds like you've got, and, you know, the panelists and Juan and Onahlea all have the right thinking about this, but the more you can do to communicate that and standardize that and create symbols and markers that will only, you know, bring back business faster.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The next question is sort of a follow-on, probably with a little bit more specifics. And so Onahlea and Juan, if you want to chime in on this, it's how do you envision implementing and monitoring the social distancing in the hotel environment, especially in the many support areas of the hotel? Think about the restaurants, the gift shops, the fitness facility, and all of those. So had you all started to think about the monitoring piece and implementing it in that way?
Shalonda, one of the things that we are doing now is to put restrictions on how many people can get in an elevator, which it seems like, you know, most of the time you get into a hotel and you see a big group check-in, and then there's like this rush to the elevator, and there's, you know, everybody's like crammed in there like sardines. That won't be the case. Now we can put 3 people in an elevator versus the 7 or 8 that tried to get in there. So, I mean, we're starting right from the experience of going upstairs. We have marked out spaces on our lobby floor so that people can stage and queue up to get to check-in. And of course, we've added the plastic barriers. In the restaurant, you know, we've moved out most of the tables and chairs so that when the staff comes down on break, they have a place to sit. It was interesting because we were working with a clinical staff who wanted to pull all the tables and chairs back together so that they could convene. It's like, no, we can't do that. No, the tables. And so we marked the bar every 6 feet. We pulled the tables out even further. We have only the amount of chairs in position where they need to be. So it's kind of like not just retraining our staff, but the traveler to make sure that they're doing the right thing. And Juan, I know you guys are working on some stuff too. So
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Onahlea. I think, we naturally gravitate to the roles of security. So I think it's really important. But right now, in the current state of the union where we are, and what our plans and call are for kind of a approach that's across the board. So associate awareness, our leaders will be highly engaged. So it's just not the responsibility of security, but basically if you see something, say something. And we want to, part of our training is allowing our staff to understand what those requirements are. So when they see something that is teetering on the line, or they can be proactive in their approach to prevent something from getting beyond where we would like for it to get, then we take that joint. It doesn't matter if you're in a restaurant or if you're in the lobby or you're in the front drive or you're out by the pool. We want any of those folks that are moving, sharing a responsibility to, we're in it together. So I think, like, I will say this, and I think most people would agree, as we reopen our doors, we are less concerned with our associate and leaders' titles, what their roles are, and we look at it more as like, this is our hotel, this is our restaurant. So it really doesn't matter who's stepping up and saying, "Pardon me, ma'am," or "Sir." Like, we want to implement our social distancing, and we have help from Baltimore City and the local health officials that have put out great stuff for us to kind of have guidelines, and we can refer back to that. But my point was, it's more than the job of security. Like, our leaders, including the general managers and the operators, the heads, will be around. We'll be out and about. We'll be making sure that we remain safe. That's the only way. Again, the responsibility of having a successful reopening or a successful phase until we found out more about the impact of COVID is the leaders, the responsibility being on the business operators and the leaders and the owners. So that was my feedback on that subject.
No, thank you, Juan. Thank you, Onahlea. Great information on that. I now have two questions. One is targeted specifically towards you, Juan, and then Onahlea, the next one is coming for you. Juan, it says, will employees be required to take a health survey prior to coming back into work each shift? And it's coming to you because their company houses their visitors at the Pendry and the Hotel Monaco. And so they wanted that insight from you.
Great question. We have placed so many things in place where associates will be required to go through sort of these thermal scanning. So we're checking. We have obviously a checklist to adhere to. Associates are screened for temperature checks and then the thermal scanners. And there's a huge protocol in place to make sure that we are also doing our part before we put anybody out on the floor, out in the restaurant, or out preparing for the next experience for our guests, that we've done our due diligence. So in fact, yes, that the answer is yes, there will be things in place to, again, increase your confidence as a consumer. So if people are placing associates in the business community that are coming to work, rest assured that we're going to make sure that we're looking at our operation and we're condensing it. We're making a very small operation so we can control as much as possible. And our commitment is to make sure we're doing a good enough job that we're keeping everyone safe. But there's also a responsibility on the associate. And that's part of the conversations and, in the reopening plan, that we have those discussions, we have those joint sessions to talk about how important it is to be fair, be honest, be consistent, and comply. And I think that is our duty, and people are excited about that because that increases their confidence. They want to know that their coworker is in good shape before they jump on the front lines with them. They want to feel good about that person cleaning the room has went through the same processes they have, and I think it's really important. But it also is a commitment and a compliment to one another, to the brand, to the culture that we are. At the end of the day, we want people to know who we are. We want to be transparent in our approach. We want to make sure that there's nothing hidden, and that we won't commit to being perfect, but we will commit to being fair and upfront. And if you know all of that before you book your reservation, you're more likely to book that reservation and feel good when you're there. We don't even looking over their heads or shoulders or just operating in any type of fear.
No, which is great. Thank you, Juan, for
Absolutely.
that detail. Onahlea, part of what's coming over to you is really about lessons learned. And so the question is, will you share lessons learned with other hospitality businesses in Baltimore?
Absolutely. I think knowledge is power, right? And we've had a very unique opportunity to kind of pivot our business and take on some new challenges. Some, if I could just quickly share a couple of our key learnings, which has been kind of interesting. To Juan's point about, you know, the temperature checks and thermal scanning, what we found just anecdotally was my team, including the management staff, really wanted a nurse to take their temperature, as if it was, you know, because this is kind of private, and then, you know, this is mine, and but if I'm at 100.4, I get to go home, and we haven't seen that yet, actually, but so, you know, the integrity of some of those processes that you put in place, and then the accountability piece behind that. You know, on the stuff that seems so germane and things that we need to be thinking about, you know, I thought that until recently, my thinking was if you put your hands in a air hand dryer, that was a good thing. Until now, it's not a good thing because it's blowing COVID all over the bathroom. And now what have you done? You know, you've had your hands sanitized, but it's still, you know, it's a problem. So, and we were prepared, honestly. This is just like one of those quick lessons, like, oh, we're going to buy some of these neat hand dryers. Well, you better stick with the touchless paper towel situation, because that's going to serve you better in the long run. And that's just like that's like easy stuff. And how much and how much on the capital management side, you know, if you start walking through your public areas and you have the public restrooms that may or may not have all the touchless features in them, that would be a great place for you to start. And how you deal with your elevators, and then, you know, it's because there's a lot of parts of a hotel that are not touchless, and it's really getting, you know, the collective together to talk about, you know, those different areas that you could have impact on.
No, great lessons there. Jake, coming back to you, looking from a more national perspective, the question is, how long is or should the associate training be prior to opening doors? What are you seeing in other cities?
You know, it's tricky because training a large group of people is very difficult. And one of the things I wanted to mention, based on all these sort of getting back to work things, is what we're seeing specifically in restaurants and in the bigger cities, is that people are worried that if somebody comes down and is diagnosed with COVID-19, there is a protocol by which the people around them are quarantined. So what does that mean for your service staff? So if somebody in the kitchen comes down, and so people are beginning to do this sort of A shift, B shift. So they have very different sets of staff coming in, so that if someone is diagnosed with COVID-19, then that group may have to quarantine for a certain period of time, but the business can still function with the other team. So as far as training, you have to think about it in multiple sessions. I think there's a train the trainer, and I think that maybe Juan and Onahlea will sort of probably reinforce this, where you get the leadership and the management team trained, and you work with them with your local health department and the CDC and the infectious disease professionals. And then there is we've seen 3 or 4 days of full employee training in hotels, where you bring in different shifts, different departments, and you make sure everybody understands the protocols. And then there's quite a bit of, okay, here's how I do it, that exists as people come back online. And there's a lot of reinforcement that needs to happen over the following 2 weeks. So it's a relatively sophisticated training plan, specifically for larger resorts that have to bring in a lot of different, bells and whistles and pieces. So, it's not only the pre-opening, but it's also the reinforcement. And when you get in, just reminding people, no, this is how you walk down the hall. This is a one-way, corridor. This is not, and how to do all that. So it's very tricky. And I'm sure, the team on the panel have had more experience than I have on this, but it's a tricky thing.
Well, thank you for that. Go ahead.
Hey, Sean, I'm sorry, I have to jump. We have budget hearings starting in about 5 minutes, but Shalonda, always a pleasure. Looking forward to next week. And Jay, Juan, and Onahlea, thank you so much. This was an incredible episode, and just really appreciate all the insight. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
Thank you so much, Councilman. Councilman, can you hear me? Okay, it seemed like it went out for a minute. Thank you so much. Please do all to continue to do the good work that you're doing to keep us going. And I'll close it out, but just want to say thank you in here, and we'll circle back. With that, the last question, really, I can take a part of it. It looks like we may have had one more that come in, but it's really about, and Jay, you may have saw some of this a little bit too, but it's how would social distancing work at various venues. So we talked a little bit about the hotels and certain things like that, but think about things that are happening throughout the city and catering events, things like that. I know one of the programs that we're doing here in Baltimore is Design for Distancing. And this is one where we're, the Baltimore Development Corporation is also partnered with the Neighborhood Design Center, Bloomberg, and some other things to figure out some best practices across the country and ways that you can, add in beautiful design, but also ensure that people are staying distant. And so I know you talked about the parklets before. It's the inclusion of parklets and, some taking over sidewalks, but doing things in a way that's also beautiful. Are you seeing any things across the country as well in that area?
Yeah, I mean, catering's tough. And, I know that the panel will agree with me probably here on this. It's tough because you're bringing people who don't normally meet together. And so what we're seeing is a combination of virtual and very sort of thoughtful social distancing events and presentations and things with very unique food and beverage opportunities and, pick up in individual portions and, very different world. And I think people are being very, very cautious. I mean, many organizations that we've seen have canceled events through next summer because they just don't want to put, their teams at risk. So, I think it's going to be very creative and very unusual for a while. And it's going to, the meetings and convention event business is going to come back quite slowly, but that's what we're seeing. It's not a big surge back on this side.
Definitely not a surge. And when it happens, I think it's also figuring out how, somewhat to what Onahlea was talking about earlier, and people trying to put tables together, making sure that those things stay apart, and all of those other elements that you have to put in place. We have one last question that's on here, and then we'll transition. But the question is really, it's a larger question about, there'll be football season and all of these larger entities and things that are happening that really are spaces where social distancing is a little bit harder to mitigate. And so their question is really about, from a city perspective, from organizations like the Downtown Partnership and all of those, like, what are things that we can start to do to make sure we're helping keep the curve flattened and make sure that we're doing that. This webinar is one of those type things. Part of what we want to do is make sure we're bringing in best practices. There are places that have done this before. We don't need to get burned. So if we can learn from those things, we want to get ahead of it. And then there are also sort of placemaking things that we can do to make sure that we are connecting and identifying as many places as possible. The other reason, especially for a lot of the convenings and us wanting to have all of these businesses do things consistently, is so that we start to reinforce the messaging. You don't go in one place and one thing happens, in another place and something else happens. And so in working, even with our partners at the NFL and the Orioles, and so when you think about the other teams, they're also thinking those same things. And so we want to make sure we're tuned in to what they're doing as well to keep those messages going. I know we're at the end. It's 9:59. There are a couple things that I want to say before we close out. The immediate is a thank you to you, Jay, Onahlea, Juan. You were fabulous in this. So much information. We could have gone on for hours and hours with that. And so I thank you for your insights in that. This information will be available. I want to let everybody to know it's going to be available on our website, and people have been accessing it. Go downtownbaltimore.com. So please go there, visit, and see the wealth of information. I also want to do a special thank you. I introduced as we do normally, but I am in a new capacity. This is my first official webinar as the president of Downtown Partnership. I was interim prior to that, and so I thank you for everybody who helped me get there. I know, Onahlea, you were part of the search committee. I thank you. I see a couple members, my board chair is on the line, so thank you, Mark, for your leadership and everything you've done. Mark Wasserman. I also see Mark Pollock on the line as well. And so I have an amazing board, an amazing team. And so I just ask you guys to bear with us as we work together to help reimagine what is going to take all of us. Panel, the right group. You all, and have a great week, and let's do this thing together. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.